The training hall fell silent as Lieutenant Hana Kim demonstrated the proper grip for close-quarters combat. Her hands moved with practiced precision, showing the assembled cadets how to disarm an opponent twice their size. The morning light streamed through the observation windows of the Galactic Naval Academy, casting long shadows across the padded floor. Vrixtal watched carefully from the front row. The young Chlorian cadet had only been at the academy for 3 months, eager to learn everything about combat tactics. His species had joined the Galactic Coalition recently, and they had never experienced real warfare. Everything about human fighting techniques fascinated him. Hana moved through the demonstration, her movements fluid and efficient. She wore the standard Academy instructor uniform, dark blue with silver markings that indicated her rank and specialization. As she turned to explain a defensive position, her collar shifted slightly. That's when Vrixtal saw it. A scar ran across the left side of her neck, jagged and deep. It looked old but prominent, the kind of mark that told a story. Unlike the clean lines of surgical scars or the minor marks from training accidents, this one seemed violent. It disappeared under her collar, suggesting it went deeper than what was visible. "Instructor Kim," Vrixtal said, his translator converting his clicking speech into standard galactic. "What is that scar on your neck?" The other cadets turned to look. Several humans in the class shifted uncomfortably. They knew better than to ask personal questions about scars. Where Vrixtal came from, marks on the body were shared freely, stories of growth and experience. He didn't understand the sudden tension in the room. Hana's hand moved unconsciously to her neck, fingers brushing the raised tissue. Her expression changed, something distant entering her eyes. For a moment, she seemed to be somewhere else entirely. "It's nothing," she said quietly. "Just an old injury. Now let's continue with the, but how did you get it?" Vrixtal pressed, genuinely curious. "It looks like it was serious. Was it from combat? Did you fight something dangerous?" One of the human cadets, a young woman named Yunji, whispered urgently to Vrixtal. "Don't ask about that. It's rude." Vrixtal's antennae drooped in confusion. "I meant no offense. On my world, we share our scars proudly. Each one is a lesson learned." Hana studied the young Chlorian for a long moment. Around the room, 40 cadets from a dozen different species waited. Some knew parts of the story. Others had only heard rumors. The Galactic Naval Academy attracted students from across known space, and Hana had built a reputation as one of the toughest instructors. But she rarely spoke about her past. She walked to the edge of the training mat and sat down, her back against the wall. It was an informal posture, breaking the usual instructor-student dynamic. The cadets exchanged glances but remained quiet. "Come here," Hana said, gesturing to the group. "All of you sit." They gathered around her in a loose semicircle. Vrixtal settled in the front, his 3 eyes fixed on his instructor with complete attention. The other cadets sat with varying degrees of nervousness and curiosity. "You want to know about this scar?" Hana touched her neck again, this time deliberately. "It's not a story about glory or heroism. It's about survival, about the cost of staying alive when everything wants you dead, about learning that sometimes the hardest enemy to kill is the one you don't want to kill at all." She paused, her jaw tightening. "Are you sure you want to hear this?" "Yes, instructor," Vrixtal said immediately. Several other cadets nodded. Hana looked around the room, meeting eyes with her students. She saw eagerness in some, apprehension in others. The human cadets already looked uncomfortable, as if they could sense where this story would go. "This happened 15 years ago," Hana began. "I was 17 years old. Just a kid, really. I joined the Colonial Defense Force on Taeyang 5, a farming colony on the outer frontier. My job was basically ceremonial. We'd never seen combat. Never expected to. The most exciting thing we did was run drills and patrol the perimeter fences to keep the local wildlife away from the crops." She smiled, but there was no humor in it. "I thought I was a soldier. I had the uniform, the training, the rifle, but I had no idea what being a soldier actually meant." Vrixtal leaned forward. "What happened to change that?" "They came without warning," Hana said, her voice dropping. "We called them the Ravagers, though that name came later. At the time we didn't know what they were. We just knew that people were dying and the dead weren't staying dead. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Even cadets from species with no concept of undead creatures understood the wrongness in Hana's words. The Ravagers are parasitic," Hana explained. They don't just kill you. They take over your body, use it as a host. They spread through contact, through bites and scratches. Once infected, you have maybe 10 minutes before the transformation completes. After that, you're gone. Your body moves, talks, thinks, but it's not you anymore. That's horrible, breathed a Visurian cadet from the back. It gets worse, Hana said. We learned later from the survivors who had medical training that the host doesn't die. Not immediately. You're still in there, conscious, aware, but you can't control anything. You're a prisoner in your own body, watching as it hunts your friends and family. Vrixtal's skin had paled to a lighter shade of green. That is beyond cruel. The first attack killed 70% of our colony in 6 hours, Hana continued. We had 3,000 people on Taeyang 5, families, farmers, children. By nightfall on the first day, only 900 of us were left alive. And the Ravagers had over 2,000 new bodies to use against us. She stood up, pacing slowly. My squad leader was a man named Jiho Park, Sergeant Park. He was 30 years old, had actually seen combat before in the border skirmishes with the Kresh. He was the only one among us who didn't panic. He organized a retreat to the agricultural bunkers, the reinforced storage facilities we used for grain and equipment. Hana's voice grew quieter. During the retreat, my best friend got infected. His name was Minho. We'd known each other since childhood. Sergeant Park ordered us to leave him behind. I wanted to go back. Park physically dragged me away while Minho screamed for help. The training hall was completely silent now. Even the environmental system seemed to have quieted, as if the station itself was listening. That's where this story begins, Hana said, touching her scar again. In those bunkers with less than 50 survivors and an army of infected colonists hunting us. No rescue coming, no way to call for help. Just us and them and Sergeant Park trying to keep us alive one more day. She looked at Vrixtal directly. You asked about my scar. This mark came from the person I respected most in the universe. And getting it was the easy part. What came after, that's the story worth telling. Will you tell us? Vrixtal asked softly. Hana nodded slowly. Yes, but not because it's a good story. Because you need to understand what survival really costs. What it means to be a soldier when the rules don't apply anymore. When the person you're fighting is wearing the face of someone you love. She returned to her position at the front of the training mat. Class is dismissed for today. Tomorrow I'll tell you about the siege, about the breach, and about the kill that took too long. Be prepared. This isn't the kind of story that ends happily. The cadets filed out slowly, speaking in hushed tones. Vrixtal remained for a moment, looking at his instructor with new eyes. Thank you for sharing, Instructor Kim, he said. Hana nodded. Ask me tomorrow if you still want to thank me. The next day, the cadets gathered earlier than usual. Word had spread through the academy about Instructor Kim's story. The training hall was packed, with students from other classes standing along the walls. Even some of the senior instructors had found reasons to be present. Hana arrived exactly on time, her expression unreadable. She saw the crowd and didn't comment on it. Instead, she moved to the center of the room and sat down in the same spot as before. The students quickly arranged themselves around her. Taeyang 5 was beautiful, Hana began without preamble. 3 suns in the sky, turning the clouds purple and orange at dawn. We grew crops that couldn't exist anywhere else because of the unique light spectrum. The air smelled like honey and fresh rain. I grew up thinking it was paradise. She paused. The Ravagers took 12 hours to turn it into hell. Vrixtal had brought a recording device, hoping to preserve the story. Hana noticed but said nothing. The first attack came at noon on a Tuesday, she continued. I was on patrol with Minho and 2 others, walking the eastern perimeter. The alarm came from the northern farms, screaming, so much screaming. We ran toward it, thinking maybe a harvester accident or wildlife breach. Hana's eyes focused on something distant. When we got there, the farmers were eating each other. That's the only way to describe it. People we'd known our whole lives tearing into their neighbors with teeth and hands. Their eyes were wrong, completely black. And they moved wrong too fast, too coordinated. A Visurian cadet raised his hand. Did you not have weapons? We had stun rifles, Hana said. Standard colony defense gear, non-lethal. We'd never needed anything stronger. I shot at them, we all did. The stun charges dropped them for maybe 10 seconds. Then they got back up and kept coming. She stood and began pacing. Minho called it in. We got orders to fall back to the main settlement. We ran. Behind us, we could hear more screaming as the infection spread. Every person who fell became another enemy. The numbers grew exponentially. When we reached the settlement center, Sergeant Park was already organizing a defense. He'd grabbed every weapon he could find, including the emergency armory. Real weapons. Lethal ones. He was handing out rifles and ammunition to anyone who could hold them. Hana's voice grew harder. Park had seen combat before. He knew what we were facing, even if the rest of us didn't understand yet. He looked at the situation for maybe 30 seconds before making the call. Evacuation was impossible. The spaceport was on the far side of the colony, already overrun. Communication arrays were down. Someone or something had destroyed them. We couldn't call for help. His orders were simple. Get to the bunkers. Bring food, water, weapons, and medical supplies. Leave everything else. We had maybe an hour before the infected reached critical mass. Brixtal clicked a question. How many of you were there? At that moment? Maybe 200 people at the settlement center, Hana said. We grabbed what we could carry and ran. The bunkers were 2 kilometers away, built into a hillside. They were designed to protect equipment and food supplies from storms, not as shelters for people. But they were the most defensible position we had. She sat back down. We didn't all make it. The infected were faster than us, smarter than we expected. They set up ambushes, cut off escape routes. By the time we reached the bunkers, we'd lost half the group. And that's when Minho got caught. The room was completely still, Anna's hands clenched into fists. We were almost to the bunker entrance. Safety was 50 meters away. An infected came out of nowhere, a woman named Sura who used to run the bakery. She grabbed Minho from behind and bit into his shoulder. I shot her off him, but the damage was done. We could see the infection spreading under his skin, black veins creeping up his neck. Sergeant Park pulled me away. I was screaming, trying to get to Minho. Park hit me hard enough to knock the fight out of me and dragged me toward the bunker. The last thing I saw was Minho on his knees, crying, begging us not to leave him, begging us to kill him before the change completed. Hana's voice cracked slightly. Park wouldn't let me go back. He threw me inside the bunker entrance and sealed the door. I could still hear Minho screaming outside. Then the screaming changed, became something else. Something that wasn't human anymore. She wiped her eyes quickly. 47 people made it into the bunkers. 47 out of 3,000. We had 3 bunker sections connected by maintenance tunnels. Each section was designed to hold farm equipment, so they were big enough for people. We had steel doors, reinforced walls. It should have been safe. But we weren't safe, Hana continued. We were trapped. The infected surrounded the bunkers within hours. We could hear them outside, testing the doors, scratching at the walls. And they were learning. Getting smarter. The Ravager infection doesn't just take bodies. It takes knowledge, memories, skills. These people knew the bunker layout. They'd built them. They knew the weak points. A human cadet named Yunji spoke up quietly. You said you had weapons. Why not fight your way out? Fight through 2,000 infected? Hana shook her head. With 47 people, half of them civilians who'd never held a weapon before that day, we'd have lasted maybe 5 minutes. No, Park made the right call. We fortified. We rationed supplies. We set up a watch rotation. And we waited for rescue. She laughed bitterly. Rescue that we couldn't call for. Taeyang 5 was a frontier colony. The next scheduled supply ship wasn't due for 6 weeks. Our emergency beacon was at the spaceport, which was lost in the first hour. We had no way to tell anyone we needed help. What about medical supplies? Asked the Vizirian cadet. Could you not cure the infection? We had a doctor in our group, Hana said. Her name was Suna Kang. She tried everything. The infection was like nothing in any medical database. It spread through blood and saliva, took over the nervous system, rewrote neural pathways. Dr. Kang worked around the clock trying to understand it. Hana's expression darkened further. She made a terrible discovery on day 3. She sedated one of the civilians who'd been bitten but not fully turned yet. Did a deep neural scan. What she found broke all of us. The original consciousness doesn't die. The host remains aware, trapped, conscious, unable to control their body, unable to speak, unable to do anything but watch as the Ravager uses them. Imagine being locked in your own skull, screaming while your hands kill your friends. Your voice calls them closer. Your memories guide the hunt. Several cadets looked physically ill. Frixtel's skin had turned almost white. That's when we started hearing them talk, Hana said quietly. The infected. They would come to the bunker doors at night and speak, using voices we recognized. saying things only those people would know, pleading to be let in, crying about being scared and cold. The psychological warfare was deliberate, calculated. I heard Minho's voice on day 4. He was outside my section's door talking about our childhood, about promises we'd made, asking why I'd abandoned him. Part of me knew it wasn't really him, but part of me wondered if maybe, somehow, he was still in there. If we could save him. Park came to stand beside her that night, she remembered. Listened to Minho's voice begging through the door. You can't save him, Park had said. The boy you knew is gone. That thing out there is using his memories as a weapon. Don't listen. But what if some part of him is still aware? 17-year-old Hannah had asked. What if he's suffering? Park's answer was cold but necessary. Then the kindest thing we can do is survive. Tell his story. Make sure his death meant something. Hannah looked at her assembled students. That was the hardest lesson Sergeant Park ever taught me. Sometimes mercy means moving forward. Sometimes the best way to honor the dead is to keep living. She stood up slowly. We held the bunkers for 3 weeks. Every day the infected tried new tactics. Every day we lost a little more hope. Our supplies dwindled. People started to break psychologically, and through it all Park held us together. He was the best of us, Hannah said softly. Smart, strong, never stopped fighting. He made me his second in command even though I was the youngest. Taught me tactics. Taught me leadership. Taught me how to make the hard choices. Her hand moved to her neck scar. And eventually he gave me this. But that comes later. First you need to understand what it was like in those bunkers. The fear, the desperation, the slow realization that rescue might never come. The training hall lights seemed dimmer somehow. The story was getting darker and everyone could feel it. Tomorrow, Hannah said, I'll tell you about the siege, about what we did to survive, about the choices we made when survival was the only thing that mattered. The cadets left quietly, many of them looking shaken. Frickstall approached Hannah again. Instructor, I'm sorry I asked about your scar, he said. Hannah shook her head. Don't be. These are stories that need telling. Pain that needs remembering. Otherwise, people like Minho and Sergeant Park died for nothing. By the 3rd day, word of Instructor Kim's story had spread beyond the academy. Hannah arrived to find not just cadets but senior officers standing along the back wall. Among them was Commandant Dalmore, the Visurian administrator who rarely attended training sessions. Hannah met his eyes briefly. He nodded once, a gesture of permission and support. She took her usual position and waited for the room to settle. Day 5 in the bunkers, Hannah began. That's when we ran our first inventory check. The results weren't good. We had maybe 3 weeks of food if we rationed strictly. Water wasn't a problem since we had access to the bunker's well system, but ammunition was critical. We'd used too much in the initial retreat. She looked around the room. Sergeant Park divided us into teams. Defense, supply management, medical, and engineering. The engineering team was led by a civilian named Young-Ho Lee. He'd helped build these bunkers 20 years earlier. If anyone could make them more secure, it was him. Lee started reinforcing the doors immediately, welding additional plates, setting up early warning systems with whatever materials we had. He was 50 years old, a quiet man who'd spent his whole life building things. Now he was building walls to keep monsters out. Hannah began pacing. The infected tested our defenses constantly. They would throw themselves at the doors in waves, trying to break through by sheer force. When that didn't work, they tried digging. We'd hear them at night, scratching at the walls, trying to tunnel through. But they were getting smarter. That's what scared us most. Each day, their tactics improved. They started coordinating attacks, drawing our attention to one door while probing another, using tools, setting traps for anyone who ventured near the entrance. A cadet raised his hand. Could you not have called for help? Any transmission at all? Lee tried, Hannah said. He built a makeshift transmitter from spare parts. Got it working on day 7. We sent out a distress signal on every frequency we could access, but Taeyang 5 was in a communication dead zone. The nearest relay station was 40 light-years away. Even if our signal reached someone, help wouldn't arrive for weeks. She sat down on the edge of the training platform. Dr. Kang continued her research on the infection. She was obsessed with finding a cure or at least a way to stop the spread. She worked with tissue samples from the early victims, trying to understand the Ravager biology. What she discovered was worse than we imagined. The Ravagers weren't just parasites. They were networked, connected somehow. Information spread between them instantly. If one learned something, they all learned it. Every infected person added their knowledge and memories to a collective intelligence. Vrixtal's translator clicked rapidly. A hive mind? Essentially, Hana confirmed, which meant that among those 2,000 infected were farmers, engineers, security personnel, teachers, and doctors. Every skill our colony had possessed was now working against us. They knew our defenses because they'd built them. They knew our tactics because they'd trained us. The room absorbed this information in grim silence. On day 9, they cut our power, Hana continued. The bunkers had backup generators, but the main power came from solar panels on the surface. The infected destroyed them systematically. We went dark except for emergency lighting. The temperature started dropping. Taeyang 5 had cold nights. Without heating, the bunkers became freezing. Lee managed to get one generator running, but we had to ration power. 2 hours of light and heat per day. The rest of the time we sat in the cold darkness, listening to the infected scratching at the walls, listening to familiar voices calling our names. Hana's expression grew distant. That's when people started breaking. A woman named Hyejin tried to open the door one night. Said her daughter was outside, said she could hear her crying. It took 3 people to stop her. We had to restrain her, keep her locked in a separate section. Others followed. The psychological pressure was immense. We were living in the dark, freezing, knowing that outside those doors were people we'd loved, people we'd known our whole lives. And they were screaming. Always screaming. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. Sergeant Park held us together through sheer force of will. He organized activities to keep people busy, training sessions, equipment maintenance, anything to keep minds occupied. He made sure everyone had a purpose, a reason to keep going. He also made the hard decisions that no one else would make. On day 12, our food ran lower than projected. Someone had been stealing from the supply room. Park found out who it was. A young man named Daeho, barely 20, scared, hungry, taking extra rations. Hana turned back to face the cadets. Park cut Daeho's rations in half for a week as punishment. Gave the extra portions to the children in the group. Daeho was furious, said it was unfair, but Park was right. In survival situations, you can't tolerate theft. It undermines everything. I learned a lot watching Park lead. He wasn't cruel, but he was absolutely firm. Rules existed for a reason. Discipline kept us alive. He taught me that leadership isn't about being liked. It's about making decisions that keep your people breathing. The human cadet Yoonji spoke up. Did anyone else get infected during the siege? Hana nodded slowly. Yes, on day 15. A maintenance tunnel we didn't know about. Lee found it when checking the bunker blueprints. It connected to an old drainage system. The infected found it the same day we did. They came through at night during a sleep shift, got into the supply section before we knew what was happening. 3 people were bitten before we sealed that tunnel. We locked them in a storage room. They begged us to let them out. Promised they'd fight the infection. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. We couldn't risk it. We had no cure, no treatment. Dr. Kang sedated them so they wouldn't suffer during the transformation. Then we waited. Listened to them change. Listened to them become something else. Park made me stand guard outside that room. Made me listen. He said I needed to understand what we were fighting. Needed to hear what the infection did to people. It was the cruelest kindness he ever showed me. Several cadets looked away. The weight of the story was becoming too much. After that breach, Lee worked around the clock, reinforcing every possible entry point. He barely slept. Barely ate. Just welded and hammered and built. I asked him once why he pushed himself so hard. He said his wife and son were among the infected. Said if he stopped working, he'd have time to think about them. Time to remember. Hana walked back to the center of the room. By day 20, we were down to 42 people. 5 lost to the tunnel breach. 12 more gone to despair, madness, or medical complications. Our food would last maybe 1 more week. Our ammunition was nearly gone, and the infected showed no signs of stopping. We all knew rescue wasn't coming in time. Even if the signal had been received, even if help was on the way, we'd be dead before they arrived. The math was simple and brutal. She paused, letting the silence stretch. That's when Sergeant Park made his last plan. A desperate, stupid, brilliant plan. We couldn't defend anymore. Defense was slow death. So we'd go on offense. The bunkers had an emergency exit tunnel on the far side. It led to the forest 3 kilometers from our position. Park's idea was simple. Create a distraction at the main entrance. Draw all the infected there, then evacuate through the emergency exit. Make a run for the old mining facility in the mountains. It was insane. The mining facility was 40 kilometers away through rough terrain. We'd be exposed, vulnerable, but staying meant certain death. At least running gave us a chance. Frickstall leaned forward. Did the plan work? Hana's expression went dark. We never got to find out. On day 23, everything changed. The infected breached the outer bunker, and in the fighting that followed, Sergeant Park got infected. The room seemed to hold its breath. That's where the real story begins, Hana said quietly. Everything before was just preparation, just context. Because what happened next, what I had to do, that's what left this scar. That's what changed me from a scared kid into the person standing before you. She touched her neck. Tomorrow I'll tell you about the breach, about watching my mentor transform into the enemy, about receiving this mark and what it meant, about the moment I realized that to save everyone else, I'd have to kill the only person who knew how to save us. Commandant Dalmore stepped forward from the back of the room. Instructor Kim, perhaps we should— No, Hana interrupted gently but firmly. They need to hear this, all of it. These cadets will face impossible situations someday. They need to know what that looks like. What it costs. Dalmore studied her for a long moment, then nodded and stepped back. Hana looked at her students. If anyone wants to leave, now is the time. The next part is harder than what came before. I won't think less of you for walking away. No one moved. 40 sets of eyes remained fixed on their instructor. Then tomorrow, Hana said, I'll tell you about the day I lost Sergeant Park and the day I became a soldier. The training hall was packed to capacity. News of Instructor Kim's story had reached every corner of the academy and beyond. Some cadets had been standing outside for an hour, waiting to ensure they got a spot. The atmosphere was different today, heavier somehow, as if everyone could sense what was coming. Hana entered and found Commandant Dalmore already present, standing beside several other senior officers. She recognized Captain Taijin Song among them, commander of the rescue fleet that had eventually found the survivors. His presence told her that word had spread far beyond the academy. She didn't acknowledge them. Instead, she walked to her spot and sat down. The crowd quieted immediately. Day 23, Hana began, her voice steady but quiet. We'd been in the bunkers for over 3 weeks. 12 people remained alive. We were down to our last food supplies. Ammunition was critically low. And the infected had been quiet for 2 days, which scared us more than their attacks. Sergeant Park said they were planning something, learning, adapting. He'd seen this pattern before in his previous combat experience, the quiet before a major assault. He was right. She looked down at her hands. They breached the outer bunker at dawn. Not through the doors, not through the tunnels. They came through the ventilation system. Lee had reinforced the main vents, but there were smaller air shafts we'd missed. Emergency overflow vents built into the original design. The infected were small enough, had made themselves small enough to squeeze through. They dropped into the outer bunker section like rain. Hana's jaw clenched. We were sleeping. The attack was perfectly timed to our rest rotation. I woke up to screaming, grabbed my rifle and ran toward the sound. The outer bunker was chaos. 6 infected had made it through. They'd killed 2 people before we even knew they were inside. Park was already there, fighting. He was always first into danger, always protecting others. He shot 3 infected in the first 30 seconds. Clean headshots, perfect technique. Then he ran out of ammunition. Her voice cracked slightly. The 4th infected came at him from behind. A young girl, maybe 10 years old. Someone's daughter. Park didn't see her until too late. She jumped on his back, bit into his shoulder before he could react. The room was absolutely silent. Even the environmental system seemed to have stopped. I shot her off him, Hana continued. Killed a child. Watched her body hit the floor. But the damage was done. We could see the infection spreading. Black veins crawling up Park's neck. He looked at me and in his eyes I saw acceptance. He'd known this would happen eventually. He grabbed my arm, pulled me close. His voice was already changing, getting rougher. Listen to me, he said. You're in command now. Get them out. Use the emergency tunnel. Don't wait for me to turn. Hana stood up, unable to sit still anymore. I refused. Told him we'd restrain him. Lock him up like we'd done with the others. Find a cure. He laughed, actually laughed. Said there was no cure and we both knew it. Make me a promise, he said. The infection was spreading faster than usual. Combat adrenaline accelerated it. Promise me you'll survive. Promise me you'll tell this story. promised me their deaths meant something. She paced across the front of the room. I promised. What else could I do? He was my commanding officer, my mentor, the person who'd kept us alive for 3 weeks. I promised him everything he asked. Then he gave me his command codes, his tactical notes, everything he knew about combat and leadership. Tried to cram weeks of training into 5 minutes. The whole time I could see him fighting the infection, fighting to stay himself just a little longer. Hana's hand moved to her neck. That's when it happened. The infection reached his brain. He was mid-sentence telling me about defensive formations when his eyes went black. Completely black, like someone had flipped a switch. He lunged at me. No hesitation, no recognition. 1 second he was Park, the next he was something else. Something that wore his face but wasn't him anymore. I dodged, barely. He was faster than the other infected, stronger. The Ravager had his combat training, his muscle memory, his tactical knowledge. He came at me again. I couldn't shoot. Couldn't make myself pull the trigger. This was Park, the man who'd saved my life a dozen times. The man who'd taught me everything. My hands were shaking so bad I couldn't aim. Brixtel spoke quietly. What did you do? I ran, Hana said simply. Grabbed the survivors and ran for the emergency tunnel. Lee sealed the doors behind us, trapping Park and the other infected in the outer bunker. We could hear him on the other side. Hear him throwing himself against the door. Methodical. Calculated. Looking for weaknesses. We made it to the emergency tunnel. Started evacuating. Lee stayed behind to set charges, planning to collapse the tunnel behind us. But Park was too smart. Too fast, Hana's voice grew tight. He found another way through. A maintenance shaft that bypassed the sealed doors. He came through just as we were helping the last survivors into the tunnel. Lee turned to face him. Tried to buy us time. Park killed him in seconds. Ripped through Lee like he was paper. Then he came for me. She stopped pacing and stood very still. We fought in that tunnel, hand to hand because I still couldn't shoot him. Stupid, sentimental, nearly got me killed. He was better than me in every way. Faster, stronger, more skilled. The only advantage I had was that I knew how he fought because he'd trained me. He grabbed me by the throat, lifted me off the ground. I thought it was over. Then he paused. For just a second, his grip loosened. His eyes flickered. Like maybe some part of Park was still in there, still fighting. Hana touched her scar. That's when the Ravager fully asserted control. Something erupted from his throat. A black tendril, sharp as a blade, organic, alien. It slashed across my neck as I twisted away. The pain was incredible. I fell bleeding. The other survivors pulled me into the tunnel. Someone dragged Park back just long enough to seal the entrance. We collapsed the tunnel with the charges Lee had set. Trapped Park on the other side. I could hear him screaming. Not human sounds. Something worse. She sat down heavily. We ran through the emergency tunnel. Made it to the forest. 10 people left out of 47. Out of 3,000. My neck was bleeding badly. Dr. Kang tried to treat it, but we had no proper supplies. She cauterized the wound with a heated knife blade. No anesthetic. Just me biting down on a piece of wood while she burned the infection out. Several cadets looked physically ill. Yoonji was crying quietly. We ran for the mountains, Hana continued. But we weren't safe. The infected followed. All 2,000 of them. And leading them was Park. He'd survived the tunnel collapse. Dug his way through. And now he was hunting us with the full knowledge of our escape plan. He knew where we were going. Knew the terrain. Knew exactly how we'd try to survive. Her eyes were distant, remembering. The other infected were mindless compared to him. They attacked in waves, no strategy. But Park was different. He set ambushes. Cut off escape routes. Divided our group. He was using everything he'd taught me about tactics, turning my own training against me. We lost 3 more people in the first day, 2 in the second. By day 5 in the wilderness, only 5 of us remained, and Park was still out there. Still hunting, still learning. Hana looked directly at Vrixtal. You asked about my scar, about the kill that took too long. This is where that story truly begins, because from that moment I knew what I had to do. To save the others, to survive, to honor Park's last wish, I had to hunt him. I had to kill my mentor using the skills he'd taught me. But he knew me just as well as I knew him. He'd trained me. Every tactic I knew he'd taught me. Every move I could make he'd shown me. Fighting him was like fighting my own shadow. And he had the advantage of the Ravager intelligence, the collective knowledge of 2,000 minds. She stood slowly. Tomorrow I'll tell you about the hunt. About 7 days tracking the most dangerous enemy I've ever faced. About the mistakes I made. The people who died because I hesitated. About learning that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone you love is kill them. Quickly. About the moment I stopped being a student and became something else. Entirely. Commandant Delmore stepped forward. Instructor Kim, I think. One more day. Hana interrupted gently. They need to hear the end. Need to understand what it cost. She looked at her students. The hardest part is still coming. If you can't handle it, I understand. But I promise you there's a lesson in this pain. A reason I'm telling you. Tomorrow you'll understand why this scar took too long and why that matters. Captain Song spoke from the back of the room, his voice carrying authority. I was there for the rescue. I saw what she did. Listen to tomorrow's story. Learn from it. This is what real combat looks like. Not glory, not heroism, survival. Hana nodded her thanks to him. Then she dismissed the class and walked out alone, her hand unconsciously touching the scar on her neck. The final gathering was different from the others. Every seat was filled. Officers stood along the walls. Even some off-duty personnel had found their way to the training hall. The story had taken on a life of its own throughout the academy, and everyone wanted to hear how it ended. Hana entered to complete silence. She looked tired, as if reliving these memories had drained something essential from her, but her eyes were clear and determined. This story needed to be finished. She sat down in her usual spot without preamble. 5 survivors, Hana began. Me, Dr. Kang, 2 security officers named Bowman and Jiwon, and a teenage girl named Nari. We were making our way through the forest toward the mountains. 40 kilometers of rough terrain, and behind us, 2,000 infected led by the smartest, most dangerous one of them all. Sergeant Park. She paused, gathering herself. The hunt began on day 24. Park attacked us at night, testing our defenses. He didn't commit to a full assault. Just probed our camp, learned our patterns. By dawn, he disappeared back into the forest. But we knew he was watching. Waiting. I realized then that running wouldn't work. He was faster. He knew the terrain. He could track us forever. If we wanted to survive, I had to stop running and start hunting. Vrixtel leaned forward, his translator clicking softly. You hunted him, alone? Not at first, Hana said. Bowman and Jiwon helped. We set up a defensive position in a rocky outcrop and waited. Park would have to come to us eventually. The other infected were spreading through the forest, searching randomly. But Park was methodical. He'd find us, he did, on day 25. But he didn't attack directly. Instead, he drove the other infected toward us in waves, using them as cannon fodder while he observed, learning how we fought, what weapons we had, how we coordinated. Hana's expression darkened. We killed dozens of infected that day, burned through most of our remaining ammunition. By nightfall, we were exhausted. That's when Park made his real move. He came from an angle we hadn't covered, killed Bowman before we even knew he was there. Jiwon died trying to save him, just threw himself at Park, bought us maybe 10 seconds. Enough time for me, Kang, and Nari to run. We scattered into the forest. Park had to choose who to follow. He chose me. She stood and began pacing. I realized later that was strategic. I was the biggest threat, the only one with combat training. If he killed me, the others would be easy prey. But it also meant I could use myself as bait. Draw him away from Kang and Nari, so I ran, led him deeper into the forest. And somewhere during that run, something changed in my head. I stopped being prey and started being a hunter. I knew how Park thought, knew his tactics, knew that he'd try to ambush me, cut off my escape. So I started laying traps, simple things at first, tripwires, deadfalls, anything to slow him down or injure him. Hana smiled grimly. None of them worked. He was too smart, too careful. He avoided every trap like he could see them coming, because he could. He'd taught me how to make those traps. He knew every trick I knew. Day 26. I had 1 magazine left for my rifle, maybe 20 rounds. Park had an army of infected at his command. The math was impossible, so I stopped trying to fight fair. I found a stream and followed it upstream. Water masked my scent, made me harder to track. I climbed trees to avoid ground-level ambushes. I moved during the day when the infected were slower, more vulnerable to light. I started thinking like prey while planning like a predator. She sat back down. That night I heard him. Park was calling my name, using his own voice. The Ravager could do that, could force the host to speak. He was saying things only Park would know, apologizing for leaving me, asking me to come back, promising he could fight the infection if I just helped him. I knew it was a trap, knew it wasn't really him, but hearing his voice broke something inside me. I cried for the first time since the siege began. Just sat in a tree and cried while he called my name in the darkness below. The training hall was completely silent. Several cadets were openly weeping. Day 27. I started taking risks. Dangerous risks. I needed to know Park's patterns. Where he hunted. How he coordinated the other infected. So I followed him instead of running. Watched from a distance. Studied him like he'd taught me to study enemy movements. I learned that he was still protecting something. The other infected followed his commands, but he kept them away from a certain valley. I didn't understand why until I scouted it. Dr. Kang and Nari were hiding there. Park knew where they were but hadn't killed them. Hana's voice caught. Some part of him was still fighting, still trying to protect people. The Ravager had his body, his knowledge, his skills, but some core part of Park was resisting, keeping the infected away from the last survivors. That's when I understood. He wasn't hunting me to kill me. He was hunting me because he knew I was the only one who could stop him. He wanted me to kill him before the Ravager completely took over, before he lost that last bit of control. She wiped her eyes. Day 28. I made my decision. I would kill Park, not because I wanted to, because he needed me to, because that's what he would have ordered if he could. I spent 2 days preparing, found the perfect location, a narrow canyon with only one entrance, set up my killing ground, used everything he'd taught me about ambushes, fields of fire, fallback positions. If I was going to kill my teacher, I'd do it using his own lessons. Day 30. I made noise. Deliberate noise. Let him find my trail. Led him toward the canyon. He followed, cautious but curious. The Ravager was smart, but it was also arrogant. It thought it had already won. Hana stood again, her movements tense with remembered adrenaline. He entered the canyon at dawn. I was positioned on the ridge above. I had him in my sights. Clean shot. Center mass. All I had to do was pull the trigger. I couldn't. My hands were shaking. This was Park, the man who'd saved my life. Taught me everything. Treated me like I mattered, and I was going to shoot him in the back. He stopped walking, turned around, looked right at me even though I was hidden. He smiled, actually smiled. Then he spoke. His real voice, not the Ravager rasp. Good positioning, he said. Perfect ambush. I taught you well. Tears were streaming down Hana's face now, but her voice remained steady. Then the Ravager took over again. The smile disappeared. He started climbing toward my position. Fast, inhuman. I had maybe 30 seconds before he reached me. I still couldn't shoot, even knowing what I had to do. Even knowing he wanted me to. My finger froze on the trigger. Park charged. I rolled aside at the last second. We fought hand to hand on that ridge. He was still faster, still stronger. But I was desperate, terrified, and I knew I couldn't beat him in a fight. So I cheated. Used a tactic he'd taught me for fighting stronger opponents. I let him grab me. Let him think he'd won. Then I triggered the trap I'd set up. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Explosive charges from our demolition supplies, buried in the canyon floor. I detonated them with him standing right on top of them. The blast threw us both off the ridge and I landed in a tree. Broken ribs, concussion, but alive. Park landed in the canyon. The explosion had torn him apart. He should have been dead. But the Ravager wouldn't let him die. I could see him trying to crawl. Trying to regenerate, I climbed down. Took me 10 minutes with my injuries. By the time I reached him, he'd partially healed. Not enough to be dangerous. Enough to still be suffering. Hana's voice cracked completely. He looked at me. Really looked at me. And for just a second, his eyes weren't black anymore. They were Park's eyes. He said 3 words. Thank you. Finish it. Then the darkness came back. He started to move. Started to heal faster. I put my rifle against his head and pulled the trigger. The silence in the training hall was absolute. That was day 30, Hana said quietly. The kill took 7 days from when I decided to do it. 7 days of planning, stalking, preparing. The actual fight lasted maybe 3 minutes, but those 7 days broke something in me that never healed right. Dr. Kang and Nari found me 6 hours later. I was still sitting there with Park's body. They pulled me away. We made it to the mountains. Set up a signal fire. The rescue fleet arrived on day 31. She looked at Captain Song. Captain Song was commanding officer of the rescue mission. He found 3 survivors. Nari didn't make it. Got infected during the last night. Dr. Kang had to kill her. Song nodded confirmation from the back of the room. My scar took too long to heal because I'd cauterized it wrong. Because we had no proper medical care. Because infection set in deep. By the time we were rescued, I'd developed sepsis. Spent 3 months in a medical facility. Hana touched her neck. But the real scar, the one that matters, is that it took me 7 days to kill Sergeant Park. 7 days when every hour mattered. 7 days when I could have saved Bowman and G1 if I'd been faster. 7 days when my hesitation cost lives. That's what this scar means. A kill that took too long. A lesson about the cost of hesitation. About how sentiment and mercy and love can be weaknesses when survival requires hard choices. She looked at her assembled students, but it also taught me that being human means caring even when it hurts. Means remembering the people we lose. Means carrying our scars and learning from them rather than becoming cold and empty. Park's last order was to survive and tell the story,